Hi, I'm Tom Anderson, and this is the Anderson Alternative Channel. In my last video, in which I relayed some expert opinions on the current state and likely evolution of the coronavirus pandemic, I received a lot of criticism about fear-mongering and inciting panic. But these allegations betray some fundamental misunderstandings which I'd like to take a moment to try to resolve. The purpose of this channel is an alternative viewpoint from the mainstream. Initially, I thought I'd be talking about alternative energy and off-grid homesteading, but I got a little sidetracked with the coronavirus pandemic, which is obviously more of an immediate and proximal concern, worthy of focus for preparedness-minded individuals such as myself, and hopefully you as well. Ultimately, alternative energy and off-grid homesteading are a means of being sustainable and independent in the face of large-scale, extended, society-paralyzing crises, which the coronavirus pandemic threatens to be. Most people, they get a job, they rent an apartment or buy a house, pay their utility bills, accept their doctor's advice, and live an average of 78.69 years, watching sitcoms, playing video games, getting fat and out of shape, and eventually contracting heart disease or cancer, and dying. For some people that might be just fine, as long as things just keep going along the way they have been. But we can't just assume that the world is a static place, that the way that we've experienced up to this point, we can assume is going to be the way it is going forward. Crisis today is when your favorite corn syrup-based food-like product is out of stock, or your internet service is too slow to play Netflix.
There's a box of Twinkies in that grocery store. Not just any box of Twinkies, the last box of Twinkies that anyone will enjoy in the whole universe.
Most people cannot handle even a mild emergency, let alone any kind of 100-year event, let alone any kind of 1,000-year event. These things do happen, whether it be cosmological, or climatological, or geological, or epidemiological in origin. But some of us with a prepper mindset hold ourselves to a higher standard, in light of the fact that the government and first responders and the medical system will not always be able to save you. Anytime we have any situation of an unusual scale, from heavy snowstorms to massive hurricanes to industrial scale accidents, our normal emergency response systems can easily get bogged down and overwhelmed. As an emergency medical technician myself and a Pennsylvania State Constable, I've been trained in the National Incident Management System, the Incident Command System, Hazardous Materials Operations, Traffic Incident Management, Life Flight Awareness, Wilderness Rescue, Emergency Vehicle Operations, Active Shooter Training, Mass Casualty Triage, Incident Response to Terrorist Bombings, and various other topics of a large-scale emergency nature. And what I can tell you is that in most cases, successfully surviving any non-routine emergency event will most likely rely on at least an initial self-rescue. In triage, we have to make split-second decisions regarding whom to help. All those who would take too much of rescuers' resources to try to save are labeled as expectant, as in they're expected to be deceased, so the rescuers can focus on those who can be more easily saved with immediate interventions. In any kind of mass casualty incident, it's important for responders to identify multiple different hospitals according to their trauma center designations and levels in order to try not to overwhelm any single location. And it doesn't take that many patients to do so. There aren't all that many qualified nurses and doctors to call up to handle a large-scale influx of patients. So even if, on the scene of an emergency, someone could reasonably get a red Priority 1 tag and immediate evacuation, once they hit the bottleneck of the institutional medical system, they may become a de facto black tag, which is to say expectant. What's my point in this? The point is that the difference between being completely dependent upon professional rescuers and caregivers, as 99% of Americans are, and which would leave you dead in a large-scale crisis, and surviving due to independence and self-sufficiency, is just a little preparedness, risk management, and skill development. According to FEMA, preparedness means the capability to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. Identifying and assessing risk involves collecting historical and recent data on existing, potential, and perceived threats and hazards. While you may rank risks relative to each other, the fact that 30% of people die from cardiovascular disease on average in any given year doesn't mean that you should throw caution to the wind and ignore other risks that maybe occur less often, but are significantly larger in immediate impact, such as when a hurricane puts your coastal city under 20 feet of water. When you're drowning in your own home, The fact that you have good odds of developing cardiovascular disease in 20 years is of little consequence. But if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to think about his or her mortality, then getting wrapped up in statistics is an easy way to pretend that nothing can ever happen. But of course, things do happen. Between 1995 and 2011, over 260 million people per year have been victims of natural disasters, i.e. non-man-made events. Casualties of war, large-scale accidents, and economic collapses have likely inflicted similar damage. Just because you have never personally experienced a tragic event, such as an earthquake, tsunami, hurricane, flood, hyperinflation, war, or pandemic, doesn't mean that you're immune to them. Thoughts otherwise are called a normalcy bias, which is a human cognitive defect that discounts the probability of terrible things happening due to not having experienced them yet. But these things do happen all the time, just not everywhere regularly and evenly. So you may count yourself lucky so far, but that doesn't absolve you of the need to identify your risks and prepare for them. Some of the other common reasons why people don't prepare include they think it's somebody else's problem. This is the psychological effect where people dissociate themselves from an issue of critical importance, expecting some other group or individual, such as government or God, to solve it. But it's not other people's problems. Saving you is your problem. Saving your family is your problem. The other thing people have is the optimism bias. This is the inclination for people to believe that they are less at risk compared to others. In other words, it can't happen here, or it can't happen to me, or it can't happen right now. But of course, this is completely illogical, because the universe doesn't care about you, where you live, what your plans are. It's your responsibility to gauge risks and prepare for them. Another reason why people don't prepare is the bandwagon effect. People tend to do what other people do, and are concerned about what other people are concerned about. In other words, groupthink or herd behavior. But you might also think of this as the lemming effect, as in when the lead lemmings run off a cliff, the rest of the lemmings follow. Don't be a lemming. Don't get on the bandwagon. Don't dismiss risks just because other people are dismissing risks. Another reason why people don't prepare is because they're overwhelmed. The prospect of trying to plan and equip oneself to deal with every possible contingency is just too massive a problem to wrap one's head around, let alone find a place to start, or the implications of a disaster are so horrible they don't even want to consider it. But there are places to start, and you can adequately prepare for the vast majority of risks, and I'd like to help anyone with that if they want to listen. In fact, one of the best ways to cure these various cognitive biases is to start taking preparedness seriously. When you have a clear course of action, given any particular contingency, then it helps to alleviate the negative reactions and self-defeating behaviors such as anxiety, anger, blame, confusion, denial, depression, disorientation, fatigue, grief, guilt, nausea, numbness, shock, stress, and paralysis. Remaining level-headed due to forethought, skill development, and training will significantly raise your odds of surviving any crisis. So where do you start? Obviously, you should cover your bases insofar as high likelihood risks first and foremost. So maintain adequate home, auto, and health insurance. Establish financial buffers with diversified savings. Keep emergency supplies in your vehicle, a jack, blankets, things like that. Buy first aid kits and learn how to use them. Keep emergency numbers handy. Watch your diet and exercise adequately. Acquire defensive weapons and skills, etc. After that, you should do at least an informal vulnerability assessment and impact analysis of various lower probability but high impact events, such as a hurricane or forest fire or economic crash or coronal mass ejection or pandemic disease. In other words, if such and such event occurs, how vulnerable are you to the likely effects, and what kind of impact would that have on your life? Each of these threats may be low enough probability that you may not suffer any of them in your lifetime. On the other hand, some things are higher risk than others at certain times, such as when China has locked down 400 million people in quarantine due to an exponentially spreading pandemic that has already spread to 30 other countries. When I point out facts like this, it's not to inspire panic, but rather preparedness. We now have a very high likelihood of a black swan type of event, i.e. one that isn't supposed to have a high likelihood, but here it is. It can be a potentially life-ending event for millions of people, and radically change the landscape of society. And so, before the black swan lands on our doorstep, we need to do our vulnerability assessment and impact analysis, and then figure out how to mitigate and minimize the impact on your life, assure continuity of basic needs being met, and then recover and resume normality as soon as possible. But you can't do any of that by burying your head in the sand. You can't keep a pandemic at bay by comparing it to some less lethal illness such as seasonal influenza. You need to be open to understanding your actual risks and how to mitigate them. That's what I've been trying to do with this channel. In my first video on coronavirus, I explained why it's a fallacy to focus on infection avoidance. Hand washing and mask wearing are essentially superfluous activities. That's not to say that you shouldn't do them, but their ability to mitigate the threat is close to zero. In a pandemic, you have a near 100% likelihood of being infected regardless of your isolation or cleanliness precautions. And so, my second and third videos, I discussed how you can mitigate an infection by giving your innate immune system the nutrition it needs to fight the virus while not damaging your own body. The third video focused on analyzing the case of the first American infected with coronavirus and how his innate immune response nearly killed him with septic shock, as happened to many of the Chinese victims. And I repeated my advice to ensure adequate antioxidant capacity to prevent that outcome. All of the information I've provided has been backed by copious amounts of references to scientific papers published in peer-reviewed journals. And in my last and most controversial video, I merely shared the opinions of professional doctors, including those at Johns Hopkins University Center for Health Security, the former United States Food and Drug Administration Commissioner, the CEO of Novartis Pharmaceuticals, and a vaccine research scientist at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. The purpose was not to engender fear per se, but to light a fire under people to start preparing for the likelihood of an American pandemic similar to what's currently happening in China. But denial is not just a river in Egypt. Skeptics accused me of making up these professional opinions as if I could computer animate these video interviews on Bloomberg and CNBC or something. They accused me of pseudoscience in regards to how the immune system works, despite providing more than 45 references in my video descriptions. Unfortunately, these people who are clearly suffering cognitive biases are going to be black tagged in a pandemic. They'll be beyond help. But the Department of Homeland Security agrees with me. On their ready.gov site, they recommend individuals prepare for a pandemic with at least a 2-week supply of food and water, fresh supply of prescription drugs, as well as non-prescription pain relievers, nausea medications, electrolytes, and vitamins. The CDC has also published instructions on what to do if you are sick with coronavirus, including self-isolation, and they've published materials for healthcare professionals to identify and care for patients with coronavirus. So if you're sticking your head in the sand over this, you should realize that the government is taking it seriously. And just late last night, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, who had previously been downplaying the global pandemic risk, came out on Twitter and said he's concerned about the spread around the world of 2019 novel coronavirus from people with no travel history to China, saying that this was likely only the tip of the iceberg. He further warned that all countries must use this window of opportunity to prepare for the virus's arrival. So please take this risk seriously. Learn about innate immunity. Learn about what other preparedness actions to take, from food and water, to heating and transportation, to medical skills, to finances, especially with the likely popping of the stock bubble. Start with my previous videos in which I went into some details on these things. I'll update with more information when I have time. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon to be notified when I post a follow-up video, and please like and share this video to get the word out to your friends and family. As Dr. Tedros said, this is our window of opportunity. Let's not squander it. I'm of the firm opinion that nobody needs to die from this pandemic if they're adequately prepared. I don't want anyone to panic, but it'll be too late once the government is quarantining your town and you've contracted the infection and you haven't secured the medical and other skills and resources that you need to survive it. The time to prepare is now. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.